Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I am your host as usual, and obviously welcome back to the show. Today's episode 129 of the show, and before we get started, we're going to do a house cleaning real quick because, well, we always do it around here anyways, and I know somebody's going to get on my grill. I know who you are, and I don't care. I know they're going to keep saying, we get it, it's your show. I'm like, I know. But obviously, thank you guys for coming back and listening. It really means a lot to me, guys. Constantly keep coming back and you keep listening to these episodes. You keep sharing them. We're actually almost close to 1,900 total downloads, actually. So I greatly appreciate that. Like, it really does mean a lot to me. Like, granted, I'm a little bit more monotone today because it's been a long week. I've had multiple tests going on this week, and it's just a pain in the ass. Yeah, school sucks some days. But aside from that, I'm definitely excited to have today's conversation after we do a little bit of house cleaning. So I do also want to say thank you to the Patreon backers because you guys constantly keep supporting me. You guys are great. Also, if you guys want to become Patreon backers, it's only $2 a month to get early access to the episodes. We're still working out the kinks of doing other stuff for the Patreon folks. And, we're still working that out because as a college student, it's a bit hard sometimes to figure that stuff out when you're busy focusing on everything else. But we are getting stuff in the works for that, which I do have an idea. So I'll let you guys know about that once it goes live. But aside from that, we do have a guest coming back. It's been a while since he's been on the show, but I definitely needed his help on this one because we're definitely talking about something that's pretty big, even though I realize the news nowadays has been flooded with Xbox and PlayStation stuff, and also Bethesda. But I still believe this conversation is very important, especially given the grand scheme of things, because it's such a very big deal for a lot of people in the engineering field as well. And obviously this person has a good amount of experience, not with engineering, but at least in this conversation. So I'm going to let him introduce himself or reintroduce himself at this point.
Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. Hey, sure. I'm stoked to jump back in. Juan Bagnell, aka some gadget guy. Let's have a chat about some techie geeky stuff.
Indeed. Obviously, I really appreciate having Juan back. I know, Juan, you covered this on your podcast recently, and I think it's only fair that we can just go from there and expand on the conversation a little bit more because we're going to be talking about Nvidia buying out ARM, which a lot of people are like, okay, what is that? And I'm like, so in layman's terms, to explain everything, big GPU company buys the biggest silicone manufacturer on the planet. So I think that's pretty much the easiest way to sum it up, unless if you have an easier way to sum it up, Juan.
I mean, it's definitely an interesting topic of conversation, and I don't feel consumers have fully grasped or fully grokked the full mechanics of just how big a sea change this could be. We kind of take for granted that basically everything around us has some kind of computing unit or CPU or brain. And ARM has been sort of leading the charge on the designs that go into all of our mobility products. So the first tip of the spear for AI, for neural learning, machine learning, that's all been happening on phones and mobile devices. And now we've got pocketable computers that can largely keep pace and often outperform more traditional laptops and desktops. So this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and I've told people a lot of in regards to this because I have friends, like I said, I'm also a computer engineering major, and for us, when we talk about semiconductors, when we talk about silicone, we talk about processing and manufacturing, we always mention Nvidia, we always mention ARM, we mention other companies and how shrinking dies work and understanding capacitors and things like that. And one of my friends actually reached out to me and they're like, dude, what the F? They're like, I was like, yeah, I know. It's a very interesting move, especially in terms of Nvidia, because obviously, yes, Nvidia is known for primarily just sticking to the GPU market. That's all they're known for, is just primarily, and also sticking to server rooms, sticking to AI. And obviously, they've been incorporating that into their GPU lines because they've been doing the big push with DLSS 2.0, with, with the new broadcasting things getting added to the Nvidia broadcast. I believe that's what it's called, or
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say I think the main consumer push, what Nvidia is known for on a consumer level, is graphics.
Yeah.
The card that goes into a desktop that enables all of the pretty in your favorite games. I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that they've been a driving force in machine learning, that they've been a huge force in server style and GPU style number crunching. Especially for simulations in the supercomputer space. Nvidia has a huge stake in that market as well, and a lot of other just sort of peripheral, sort of high science and high technology applications. I mean, even down into like self-driving cars. Nvidia has research and a foundation built on enabling stage 3 self-driving cars. So to see them acquire the organization that is most responsible for paving the way on future mobility and low power ARM style processors is a huge deal in our market, in our tech sector, just for how all of these things are going to start fitting together. I mean, I don't know like how far you want to jump in just right off the bat, but I have to imagine that this is also going to be a heavily scrutinized acquisition deal.
Oh yeah,
because
sure.
I'm sure a number of regulators are very concerned over one company having this much influence over almost every single aspect of consumer electronics, television, media content consumption, all the way up to those higher science and research style computing environments too. The Nvidia would literally have a play in nearly every single sector of the tech and consumer landscape.
Yeah, and I think that's a very big concern because a lot of people are like, well, we're seeing a monopoly. Like I've seen people post memes where they post like the monopoly thing and comment sections talking about like this acquisition because, like I said, the biggest GPU manufacturer, the company that has the largest stake in the GPU, like holds the most market share, now owns the biggest silicone and semiconductor manufacturer on the planet.
What's kind of interesting is if we're talking at a consumer level, I'm not sure that's true. I think Intel might actually be in terms of quantity. Because Intel staples a GPU into the vast majority of their CPU design.
True.
Again, if we're talking proportion, not power and capability. But that's kind of what's interesting here is if we're living in a capitalistic environment, organizations like Intel, Nvidia, they need to be scrutinized because in their company's histories, we've seen those elements of anti-consumer, antitrust, sort of not playing fair with the markets that they dominate.
Yeah.
And so, we can look at an AMD coming up as a CPU upstart, an end run around Intel's current dominance, and in the CPU sector for desktops and laptops, it's getting really exciting.
Yeah.
We should always be concerned when there's a potential that we might chill a market by having too much influence siding with one company. But what could be interesting is again, when we see the rise of Apple making their own chips for laptops and they have their own processor design, even though they're utilizing an ARM instruction set, they're not utilizing ARM processor designs. So there is still an opportunity here, even with Nvidia occupying so much of this space, for companies to find other avenues of competition. We just need to be concerned that when Nvidia is licensing ARM as this product for other manufacturers to build off of, that they're doing so in a way that's fair, clear, and transparent.
Yeah, and I think that's a big concern, especially given Nvidia, which I know, yes, with the recent launch of the 3000 series graphics cards, I know Nvidia has been considered now in everyone's good graces because they're like, oh, the performance and everything is great. Even though the pre-orders was kind of a big, basically.
Yeah, they botched they botched the actual all of the companies involved kind of botched the actual launch day pre-orders, but you're right. It doesn't take much for consumers to be pleased,
Yeah.
right? So we're offering you a better price performance ratio than the last generation of cards, and then a bunch of geeks will go out there and say, "Oh, Nvidia's seen the light and they're doing right by customers." Our concerns aren't, can Nvidia cut prices on one generation of graphics cards?
Yeah.
Our concerns are, will Nvidia fairly handle a market and allow competition to thrive, or will we see those moves towards narrowing the market to Nvidia's favor?
Yeah,
And it's an unknown. I mean, that's the long term. Will we have regulators and regulatory agencies that can examine best business practices? Is this going to be an FTC style, conversation that we revisit on the regular? Will other companies have the financial and legal deep pockets to battle in Nvidia if Nvidia kind of runs court with this type of technology advantage and uses it only for their advantage? Those are the longer term concerns. Again, it's really easy to make people happy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's cheaper. Okay, cool. I guess they're doing good. But we still want to keep an eye on the business implications and then also the impact on competition.
Yes, especially because I remember I read the article from Bloomberg where a lot of people are mentioning how there's a specific line in there where it can be interpreted that they basically want to kick Intel out of the CPU space, which I wouldn't be surprised because everyone's basically dogpiling on Intel at this point. AMD has been, I know a lot of people, like I said, especially with the 3000 series, like I have a 3900X, a lot of people switched to AMD because of the 3000 series processors, because of how good they were, and now the 4000 series is coming out where they're pushing 7 nanometer to its limits, even though Apple's already at 5 nanometers as shown with the A14, and Intel is still stuck at the 10 nanometer process and the 14 nanometer process, which the rumors are saying that they won't have the 7 nanometer process until like 2022 2023, which by then
it's interesting though. I mean, again, let's jump in. Let's dig deeper into the weeds here, and I feel like your audience can handle it. They're probably as geeky as we are.
Probably.
When a company makes a statement like, "Hey, man, we really want to drive Intel out," we can be of two minds there. If it's through better competition and focusing on consumer products and offering the better solution, then I'm all for it. If it's we can unfairly market and position our products so that Intel can't get a competitive toehold in a future of more foldable, pocketable, multi-mode computers, then we should have some very real concerns. If it's just a straight up battle of technology, I'm actually not too concerned about Intel. They still have overwhelmingly the momentum on server side and on consumer facing. And I don't know if you caught their recent press conference about what Tiger Lake is going to do, and why they've also been so focused. But it's also why they've been so focused on graphics. Their new GPU solutions seem to be a great first start in raising the mind share and raising the performance of Intel-based graphics. So when we look at, they can't reach 7 nanometers the same time that AMD can. AMD shocked us with that chiplet design. That was a surprise for all of us. But what Intel can do that AMD can't is some of the extreme R&D. So the new FinFET design that we're going to see on Tiger Lake, even though we might be at a fabrication disadvantage at 10 nanometers, looks to be improving efficiency well enough that you can hit a price performance and a yield that makes sense against an AMD that's kind of found a better strategy than AMD of years past. What I think both AMD and Intel are in for a rude shock. I believe that mobile processors are going to find acceptance in the consumer marketplace far faster than AMD or Intel might be able to anticipate. As soon as Apple made their announcement about using custom silicon, and I love Apple's branding. It's Apple Silicon. It's not an ARM processor. It's Apple Silicon. And you kind of have to say it with like the whisper that implies that you're using a trademarked, like Apple Silicon, copyright registered trademark Apple 2020. It's not exactly an ARM processor as we've come to expect it. The A series processors from Apple don't use ARM reference designs, but it uses an ARM instruction set.
Yeah.
And this is going to legitimize this market. And we've had this conversation before. I mean, it was a while back, but
we did.
You're silly if you're buying a premium phone and you're not getting laptop displacement use out of it. I've been doing speed tests on like things like video rendering, and we have some ways to catch up on software, but a modern smartphone can hang with consumer grade laptops and usually outpace them by some surprising margins. So once we start refining some of this hardware software interaction, and phones like dual screens, the Galaxy Fold 2, the Microsoft Surface Duo are showing us a world where folding up a tablet, putting it in your pocket, and leaving your laptop at home will start to make a lot of sense. And overwhelmingly, people are going to flip those devices every year or two, sometimes like 2 to 3, but they might hold on to a laptop for 5 years.
Yeah.
Intel and AMD won't have great solutions ready for market before consumers are already overwhelmingly making that transition.
And I think that's something very important to keep in mind in the grand scheme of things as well, because as we even mentioned, like we mentioned the new iPad with the A14. Yes, the first 5nm processor in a mobile device. Even though, yes, a lot of people are still debating, how does this compare between the 2020 Pro, the one that I have, and the iPad Air? And I think mentioning something, as you even mentioned too, is how, yes, even though Intel is still at 10 nanometers, it's still showing improvements in efficiency just enough where it's able to still hang with an AMD processor in the same price category, even though, yes, the AMD processor is at a
smaller fabrication.
And then even going into the iPad stuff, because I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, let's jump in on the iPad, because I think this is brilliant marketing, and I feel like a number of consumers will probably be disappointed by the reality of what they actually get.
Yes, because even though, yes, the A14 is a considered more efficient chip, I think that thing's battery life is going to be amazing. That's not even a debate.
I think it'll be improved, for sure. Yeah, I think that's easy.
But I think for actual video editing, for mobile workloads, the Pro will still be better because it physically has more cores in the GPU and the CPU, which a lot of people seem to be debating at that. Because I know a lot of people on Twitter, when the A14 iPad Air came out, everybody was like, "Oh, the iPad Pro's dead. There's no point in buying it, guys. You're all suckers for wasting your money." And I'm like, well, let's back up a little bit, because even though, yes, on paper it is a 5nm, people are like, oh, 5 is smaller than 7, so 5 has to mean it's better. And I'm like, well, is it really though? Like,
so immediately, this is the thing I find sort of the most frustrating in the tech space. We're sort of algorithmically trained by YouTube to just follow whatever is going to be most popular, and you don't really take the time to verify claims. Apple makes this big bold claim. They're not even using bar graphs anymore. It's just like it's like they were using unlabeled bar graphs for the iPhone 11 Pro to show how much more powerful it was than a Samsung. And, again, for all you Apple stands that say, well, Apple never compares themselves against competitors. It's like they do that all the time. Stop it. Stop doing that. Stop saying that. Apple's no better. They're not magic.
They're not. I do agree. They have some of the best engineers on the planet, but...
For sure. Oh, no one's questioning that. But what you're feeding into are a bunch of PowerPoint slides from Apple marketing.
Yeah.
Not what the engineers have actually delivered. And it's the marketer's job to kind of cloud. So the new iPad Air is kind of a perfect example of this. You get that one screen grab of their keynote that says 40% more powerful. And you're like, wow, that's a big number. But it's 40% more powerful than the previous generation iPad Air, which had an A12. So Apple isn't giving you a comparison point year to year or against the Pro. So to your point, they're not saying this is going to be 40% more powerful than an A13. It's 40% more powerful than an A12. And when you break down like a Gary Explains or an Antec, we could only be looking at about another 8% bump, 8 to 10% bump going A13 to A14, which at this stage is kind of in line. I mean, I'm expecting about a 10% bump going from a Qualcomm 865 to an 875.
Yeah.
The big arms race right now, and where Apple was ludicrously deficient, was in neural processing. These now specialty co-processors for machine learning and number crunching. And so it's great that they're saying, oh, well, we're going to have so many more flops, and that's great. But notice they didn't do any comparisons on those numbers, because the A14 is still going to struggle to catch up with the current generation of Qualcomm neural cores. And that's a big focus for Qualcomm going into the 875. So it's immediately probably going to lose. So we don't get the big numbers on that kind of performance.
And it's even funny. I was going to mention something too, where you mentioned that I was actually in the same boat, like expecting the jump from the A65 to the 75 is probably like 10%. And there's people that there was just a comment that popped into my head that I was laughing my ass off when I saw it on Twitter, when somebody was saying, what makes more sense, the OnePlus 8 Pro or the 8T that's coming out? And people are like, well, the 8 Pro is a 2020 flagship with 2019 hardware. I'm like, hold on, what? I'm like, wait a minute. Just because it doesn't have the 865 Plus, and I'm like, the 865 Plus is probably not even like 5% more powerful. It's probably less than that, if anything. It's probably just I assume it's just a marketing tool, because it's also funny because like a lot of my internships and talks with companies like TI, which is a semiconductor company, and they're like, yeah, that's the job of marketing, is that you are trying to get the customer to be happy and to feel justified in buying the product. Like you're trying to sell it to them.
In our current industry, especially for those of us on the tech side, it's never been more clear that techies have become the most conservative and the most emotional in their purchasing habits.
True.
I think general consumers have actually kind of led the market for a more reasonable price performance, getting better features and better specs in the mid-range. Phones like the iPhone SE, Galaxy A51, Pixel 4a, those lead in mindshare, because all of these average consumers aren't out there trying to buy $1,400 phones. So that's why these companies are now focusing new features at that mid-range or price segment. Or, I mean, even just for Apple, it's not new features, it's just more power so that they can keep moving services forward and not leave a bunch of people behind.
True.
When we look at that kind of conversation, I'd be very curious to see. I know some people out there probably do resemble this, but what apps are on those phones where an 845 from Qualcomm or an Apple A12 really is making their workflow struggle? I keep asking Note owners, and it's like, you're running the same apps that my mom can run on a much less powerful device. You're using the same services that a Pixel 4a can easily handle. Why are we sort of lockstep in this? I think it really came to a head this year using the Duo. The Duo has an 855. Oh, it's so outdated. Well, performance delta is around 10 to 12%, depending on what applications you're using.
True.
And thanks to optimization, I mean, there was one video transcoding test that I ran that it actually beat a bunch of 865 powered phones. This isn't specs on paper, but again, marketing makes tech geeks feel good. They emotionally purchase something, and then they work backwards to try and rationalize that purchase because they're savvy consumers, because they know what's up, but they fell for the same emotional hook, just like everybody else. And Apple is still, I feel like, head and shoulders above the rest of the tech industry in creating that feel-good marketing, so that you're assured that you're using the gold standard. And in reality, it's a very good compute platform, but it's not magic. It doesn't magically do anything so overwhelmingly better than the competition. It's a collection of pros and cons, just like any other platform. So, once you balance all of that, good and bad, you kind of arrive at sort of the same endpoint as you would using any other solution. You just have to be able to live with a different set of compromises.
Yeah, and I can add to that because I'm being honest here. I'm like, yes, I have fallen into that category where I get a bit emotional when like emotionally attached to items. Like today,
oh, the new shiny always feels good. I mean, like I don't want to like dismiss that feeling of peeling, the screen guard off of a new piece of tech and like firing it up for the first time.
Yeah.
But it's also, if we're going to sit here and claim that techies know tech and that we're good at tech, then we need to be able to separate those feels from the analysis of how these things perform.
Yeah, because adding on to that, because I know, like, speaking from experience, like, I recently just got my pre-order in for the next Xbox. And I can admit, that was a very frustrating experience. A very frustrating experience to get that to go in because, my God, I this is why I hate scalpers and bots in general. But I guess this is why people say you should learn how to code. I'm like, true. But in my opinion, I shared the same way. Like, I was getting very emotional, like trying to get this thing. And at the same time, like when I upgraded my phone this year, because I finally paid up, like it was like early in the year, I paid off my 7 Pro. And then I was like, well, like I like the phone. Like I wasn't planning on upgrading until like Viper hit me up and he's like, hey bro, I have a S20 Ultra. I had an extra lying around. Do you want it for $850? And I was like, you know what? Like, I think for that price, because I've even told people, I made a video, I talked about it where it's like, the S20 Ultra does not make sense for a lot of people, especially for $1,400. It doesn't make sense. But for $850 with no tax, I'm like, okay.
Now we're playing in a different tier.
And it's even funnier too, because technically I paid $450 for it because my cousin, actually, no, I paid what? Because my cousin bought
No. Don't move the numbers around. Samsung always gets his benefit of the doubt. You paid $850.
True. And then I sold
your other phone.
And then my other phone. Because I know like I do it that way because that just makes it easier for the numbers in my head. But I get how when you're having a conversation, you want to say it that way. It's like, yes, I paid $850. I got it for $850.
Because this is always the funny thing to me is someone will say, is like, well, I got this Samsung, Galaxy S20 Ultra for like $400. Why would you ever buy an LG at $900?
True.
And you're like, you didn't buy an Ultra for $400. And why are you comparing, your sales price plus a trade-in against the full MSRP of another brand? I know you need to feel better about that purchase, but why would you expect that you wouldn't have gotten similar sales deals or offers on another competing solution?
True.
Well, now that like you can get a Note Ultra for on sale for this and that, then why would you ever spend more? True. Well, you wouldn't. You would do similar shopping to get similar deals.
And I'd say the same thing even applies to me, like in terms of like cameras, where it's like, yes, I primarily shoot with Canon. And a lot of my friends are like, dude, you should have just jumped straight into Sony. Or then you have like the oddballs on the other side just saying Fuji, which I agree. I like the Fuji X-T4. I have my eyes on that. But I know, and then I have like the oddballs that have Panasonic, which you guys get bullied the most. Well, I'd say Nikon.
Deservedly.
Nikon gets bullied a lot too. But
Nikon gets bullied a lot, but I feel like Nikon, you still have that kind of historical sense memory of traditional photography, and I love Nikkor glass. Those lenses are gorgeous. It's fully deserved. Like if I had to rely on autofocus for any of my work, Panasonic would not be in my portfolio.
No,
it's really bad. But especially when I bought in on a G9, getting 4K 60 frame per second video, like there was literally no cheaper option for really high quality, high frame rate 4K video. And I mean, still today, I mean, the G9 is a monster buy if you work. I mean, my workflow is mostly kind of keeping it in my little home office studio where manual focus runs the day. It's got beautiful focus peaking, and I tap and focus or roll that manual focus dial and I'm good. If I were out vlogging from a camera, it would be a nightmare
Indeed.
trying to use Panasonic's autofocus system. But to that same token, I'm trying to lead the way saying, like, hey, if you're shooting stuff out in the field, you should probably be using a phone anyway.
True. And I think a lot of people seem to forget that, because I know, like, yes, when you watch a lot of camera YouTubers, yes, they do bully using a phone and saying, yes, this is not a professional tool and things like that. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. Like, granted, yes, I know even my camera gets bullied a lot because I shoot a Canon M6 Mark II, and people are like, well, why?
But it's adorable.
It's adorable. It's a very adorable camera, I'm not gonna lie, especially because
I
got the color I wanted. But I also have really nice glass for it, because that 32 megapixel sensor requires high quality glass, which that's why I have my 50 millimeter f1 too.
I totally tried it in like the kit lens and it was garbage.
I know. It's like a lot of people seem to forget that. It's like, I wonder why you spend more money on a nicer body that requires good glass. You probably should buy some good glass, because that's why people always say date the bodies, marry the glass. And that's why people say that religiously, and I'm like, I agree. Granted, like, in my personal use case, I don't see the need to go with the full frame. Heck, even for my photography business, like, a lot of my shots, everyone's been like, dude, what the F? I'm like, yeah, like, it comes down to, do you know what you're doing? And the same thing even goes with like mobile photography and things like that, and using smartphones and like wrapping this all up with like mobile devices, that people need to realize, like, yes, you can use these things for professional workflows. And a lot of people just seem to always discredit, because mobile is always considered less than what's considered the alternatives. It's always considered less. Like, same thing with mobile gaming. Like, a lot of people bully mobile gaming, and I'm like, okay, I can understand where they're coming from in that aspect. But when you have smartphones that are getting to the point, and even tablets like the iPad Pro, the Samsung Galaxy Tabs, when you have these getting to a point where their performance is rivaling, say, Nintendo Switches, then it's like, you know, and now the xCloud is coming soon, granted not on iPhones and iOS, because I'm like, haha, that's a different discussion. But the fact that now cloud gaming is becoming more accessible, and now 5G, even though I still think 5G won't be ready for maybe another 3 to 5 years at least, truly, like, actually probably fully established, that's just how I think, probably maybe 3 to 5 years at best. But the fact that now we're getting to a point where you can play games on your mobile phone, because our phones are powerful enough to do it, even your tablets. Like, a lot of people don't seem to realize this. Like, there's a reason why companies keep adding like, oh, heat sinks in the phones, and like, why are they doing that? And it's like, well, better thermal performance. There's a reason they do these things, so that you can manage heat properly, because everyone can relate that, yes, when you have a phone that doesn't really have a heatsink in it, those things will get pretty hot. I can remember using my iPhone 6S, my iPhone 7, and things like that. And it's like,
it really does seem to be the techie side, where they still have this expectation that a phone is a companion computer, and you still need a tablet and a laptop and a desktop. And I really feel, especially speaking with some of my family and friends, these aren't people who exist on the bleeding edge of technology. These are people just trying to make it through their day. The primary computing interface that they reach for, more often than not, is some type of phone.
Yeah.
A tablet might be a nice companion gadget to the phone, but a majority of those interactions take place first on the phone. And then there are a couple quality of life issues that you need, like a proper keyboard or a larger display, and they move from there. So when we start looking at what a phone can do to displace other computing uses, we're getting to that point rapidly, where a couple key accessories, I mean, the Duo, I think, really lit this up well. For using last year's completely underpowered Snapdragon 855. Plug it into a larger display, I flip out a little folding Bluetooth keyboard, and I don't know of many people who would feel like that was a different computing experience than sitting at a desktop. Yeah. It's plenty powerful. And so to go along with what you were saying, I'm sorry, just to wrap up that idea real quick.
Yeah.
On a lark, you know, I fired up Delta Touch, and they just included support for Doom 3, and I'm emulating Doom 3 on a Surface Duo and playing it at exceedingly high frame rates. Like, it's plenty capable. It's plenty fine. So really, I feel like the conversation needs to shift, where if you want a phone to cover the basics of phone stuff, you really shouldn't be shopping more than like $400.
Yeah.
That's kind of the cap. Once you start climbing above that, you should be looking to displace other products. If you're really into vlogging and you can shoot like nice high quality 4K 60 frame per second video from a phone, that means you don't have to walk around with another gadget just to capture that audio. If you can work your spreadsheets and documents from a dual screen device, you don't need to walk around with a more expensive laptop.
Yeah.
And I feel like people still treat the phone as this hamstrung, underpowered, long battery life solution. But I mean, just to throw numbers out there, because I think your audience can handle it.
I think they can.
I did a benchmark video on the Duo, rendering 4K video at around a 50 megabit per second data rate. I do a 1 minute clip with a bunch of little clips, sort of stitched together, transitions, a watermark, a soundtrack, fade in, fade out. I mean, it's supposed to be like a YouTube-y kind of video. And the Duo was able to finish it faster than the video takes to watch. So it's a 1 minute final project that rendered in about 50 seconds, 4K, 30 frames per second, 50 megabit per second data rate. Matching all of those quality settings on almost $3,000 worth of Core i9. I have a GTX 1660 Super in my Nook with 32 gigabytes of RAM, a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, using DaVinci Resolve Studio. So it's like a $300 video editing suite. It's almost $3,000 worth of computer that can render twice as fast as my Surface Duo. So you cut that render time from 50 seconds down to 25. If you're not rocking $3,000 worth of laptop, then the Surface Duo is going to hang. Yeah. The Surface Duo is going to keep pace and probably outperform if your laptop is more thin, light, ultra portable.
Yeah.
And it's from a phone with a supposedly out of date processor that's completely underpowered and old. No issues. So when I leave the house, if my workflow is more like multitasking and documents, and maybe I'm doing some video editing and I want to do some light gaming, and by light gaming I mean short interactions of AAA gaming, not Candy Crush. We've been overbuying compute power for years. Oh, yeah. Like the realization of what we can do on a product like this is now pretty extreme. And that is literally the comparison there. So anyone who's out there trying to talk about the average consumer experience on a $1,400 phone, I think is doing a tactical disservice to the overall tech community. I mean, you can cover those experiences, like I said, with an iPhone SE, with a Pixel 4a, the new TCLs. Like, it's really easy. Now, can your $1,400 phone offset the need to travel with a $2,000 laptop and $1,500 worth of camera gear?
Yeah.
And honestly, the answer to that for a lot of people out there is yes. They just got to try it, and they've got to figure out what their specific workflow is going to look like. And that's really the message that I think needs to get out a bit more. I mean, tying this all the way back to our opening topic about Nvidia and why this is both exciting and concerning is now Nvidia is going to have the first say in what the future of this market is going to resemble. You know, they're going to have the lead design on what makes mobility work, and they'll probably start using some of that influence for things like, wouldn't it be neat if your ARM-powered phone or ARM-powered tablet or ARM-powered foldable had an Nvidia GPU in it? Yep. Wouldn't that be exciting? You could have RTX on the outside of your phone. Man, that'd be crazy. Or what plugs into your TV is now using DLSS-style artificial intelligence to upscale maybe some of your old DVDs in that old collection of yours, you know, those movies, and we can use AI to enhance and, you know, expand the resolution to match your new 4K HDR TV.
Probably 8K,
you know,
going forward. No,
well, but
True.
But I mean, again, because you mentioned it, like DLSS is this incredible tech feat for compressing data, but then maximizing visual fidelity and playing with some of that lighting information with ray tracing while you're using DLSS is shocking. I mean, it's insanely good. So now you pair that with an ARM processor designed by an Nvidia focused ARM entity that is looking at how Nvidia products might interact with that new processor design. And the net positive is all of this stuff is going to get stupid more powerful, more streamlined, better compression, better upscaling, better color reproduction, better lighting information. But will that push out other competitors, like an Intel hybrid processor, an AMD chiplet design, or any of these other players like Samsung with the Exynos? If Google decides to try and make their own silicon, now will they have to do that with an eye on what Nvidia is going to certify as a compatible option or solution? We want these things to get increasingly more powerful, and I see a near-term future where even more consumers would be happily satisfied with the compute power in their phone running desktop style environments, laptop style environments. Like, we're already there. We just need software to kind of catch us up a bit. We just don't want Nvidia to be able to run the direction in one specific way that overwhelmingly benefits Nvidia's bottom line.
Yeah, and I think that's something we have to be mindful of as well, because speaking from my own personal experience, like, yes, my computer is a beefed up machine. I have a 3900X, I have a 2060 Super, 32 gigs of RAM. I have like 3 SSDs in this damn thing. The power supply, my mom hates the fact that I put a 1200 watt power supply in my computer because she's like, that electric bud.
But I need it.
But I need it. But like looking at my computer, and then some people ask me, Josh, why'd you buy the new Xbox? And I told them, well, in my mind, the way that I can justify for myself, because I don't need to justify it to anybody else, I just have to justify it to myself. But in my mind, I'm like, well, I wanted to upgrade the computer with a 3080, but I'm like, well, am I going to use that? What benefit do I get? Like, my streams are perfectly fine. I can run all my streams at 1080 60, no issue, because I primarily just play everything at 1080 at high frame rates. And I'm like, well, do I need it? What is it going to do? If I see video rendering tests in Adobe, because Adobe has the acceleration cores for the Nvidia GPUs, I'm like, well, if I see tests that show that I can get my videos out faster and make my workflow more efficient, then I consider it. But if it pretty much is the same thing, just better performance in gaming, then I'm like, well, I can save the money from buying that graphics card and just buy an Xbox, because I don't have an Xbox anymore, because I had a One S before like quarantine happened, and then around April I sold it because I'm like, well, I don't really use it. I'm mainly on my computer more often than anything. I do everything on the computer. But with the new Xbox, I'm like, well, the Xbox opens new opportunities that I can't do on my computer, like 1440p at high frame rates or 4K at 60 and things like that. And I'm like, well, I'm already in the Xbox ecosystem because I have my Elite controller. I have my Microsoft account that has like...
Well, but then also I feel like there's a psychological component too. Yeah. Like, I've got this monster workstation and I've got a 2080 Ti, and I'm probably not going to be jumping on a 3080 right away. Sure. Or, I mean, I might try and crunch the numbers on a 3090 next year. Sure. And also, to your point about video editing and stuff, I'd highly recommend taking DaVinci Resolve for a spin, because I honestly, I can't say anything has tapped my GPU like Resolve has. I mean, just... Even for resurrecting my old busted Razer gaming laptop, it cut my video rendering times in half. I mean, and that was on the junky GTX 970, that just dog of a GPU. True. And my laptop would now be a competitive field editing solution again for how good Resolve handles that kind of compute. Sorry, short story long. While I've got this monster system sitting here on my desk, I don't like sitting and working and playing in the exact same conditions. My brain is so focused on trying to get videos out and writing editorials and keeping up with my workflow that when I want a little downtime, I want a change of pace. I don't want to just like turn off one program on my PC and open a different program on my PC, because I'm still kind of going to be in workflow mode. I'm still kind of like, oh, I mean, I'm sitting here playing this game, but, I really should try and follow up on that benchmark, or I really should write out to that PR company. It's like my mind is focused here. And so moving something like entertainment out to the living room TV just makes a lot of sense for being able to unplug. I mean, it's so funny in a world where we're leaning on screens and data and internet and multimedia like never before, that just something as simple as turning to look at a different glowing rectangle kind of helps like reinforce, oh, now is the time what we spend for, recreation. How nice.
I think with me, it's interesting because, like I said, my computer does everything. Even though, yes, I told people, because people look at me, they're like, Josh, why do you have an iPad Pro if you have that computer? Or why don't you just get a laptop? And I'm like, well, I got rid of my laptop so I can have my desktop to stay in the room to do everything that I can't actually do on my tablet, which would be like my CAD designing and everything like that. Even though some people are like, well, you could, but I'm like, debatable. But my iPad does everything else because I write all my essays on there. I do all my homework on my iPad because it all works perfectly fine with Safari and Chrome. And then everything else the computer handles, like my computer handles running my streams. It handles playing all my games. It handles all the big work. And now people are like, well, now you got the new Xbox coming, so how's that going to fit into the whole flow? And I'm like, well, that just means that I have more options. That means games that I didn't buy on Steam on my computer that I have all on my Xbox account, I just play on there with my friends, because now I can play my games at the same quality as on my computer, so it doesn't feel any different. Like on my computer, when I play the Halo Master Chief Collection, I always use a controller. I don't like using keyboard and mouse because I think Halo should never have been even attempted to use a keyboard and mouse, because it's.
I mean, that's fine.
Good.
You're definitely sort of showing off like you're a filthy casual.
True.
But I mean, people are allowed to make poor decisions, and
True.
we should just still embrace and love them despite making awful.
I still have amazing aim. Anyone can fight me on that. When I'm going on Team Snipers, if I'm going 43-3 out of everyone else, yeah,
no,
totally.
It's fine. Josh, we still love you. It's okay.
I know.
It's all right.
I'm like, they can just watch me on Twitch and just see how good I do. Like, I'll let the experience do all the talking.
For sure. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Hey man, don't blame me. My competitive rank is also super high too. Even though it's Halo. Halo's the only game I use a controller on. Rainbow Six, that's all keyboard and mouse. Among Us, well, you can't even use control on that. You have to use keyboard and mouse. That game's
actually the one that I'd love to see better like controller support for, so I could play easier from my TV, would be like dungeon crawling Diablo clones.
True.
I was trying to fire up Torchlight. I just wanted to do something a little nostalgic, so I was firing up Torchlight 2. And I keep that stupid, ridiculously overpowered Nook behind my TV. And so I'm like excited, man, I'm going to play Torchlight 2, I'm going to play it from the TV, and there's no controller support. And I have zero interest in playing that game on a little wireless keyboard trackpad that we use for like multimedia control. And like, nah, I can't do this. It would be really cool if I could like map controllers to that kind of gameplay a little bit more easily.
True, because I know like in my experience, like I tell people all the time, I'm like, that's just me, like especially going through all the Halo campaigns on Legendary, my god, I'm like, yep, I am not going to try to hesitate trying to use my controller for this, because I just wanted to immerse myself with the experience that I grew up with. Even though I didn't play C when it first came out, I didn't play Halo 2 when it came out, I played 3, I played Reach, I played 4, I played 5, and I didn't actually play ODST. That's the one that I did skip. That was in my time. But I look at it now and it's just like thinking how all this mobile technology has played it plays a role in everybody's lives, and now you have one company that's basically gonna get the first say in the matter. Like it's not even like, oh, maybe, no, it's like, no, we're the ones that make the first judgment call on this. And it's like, it's concerning a little bit. Granted, yes, I do see how some people that could benefit this would be the Nintendo Switch. Now that Nvidia could now make the processors and everything inside the Nintendo Switch, now they can make something a little bit better now, because obviously, yes, the one downside with the Nintendo Switch that everyone keeps bringing up, especially with the next Xbox and PS5, is how the Switch just doesn't make much logical sense in terms of power, because now the Xbox Series S is now the same price as the Nintendo Switch with dock mode, and it's gonna run games a hell of a lot. And it's weird.
I get that. Nintendo has kind of shown us generation after generation after generation of how that's never mattered.
Yeah.
I mean, look at gaming subreddits right now.
True.
Right now, I mean, obviously, the day we're recording this, the big news is ZeniMax, Microsoft buying out ZeniMax. But look at all of the gaming memes that are coming out. Like you've got folks that are chatting up games and the mindshare, the zeitgeist, the game of the moment is a game like Among Us. If you're telling me that the processing power of some kind of mobility focused chipset is harming the gaming experience to any degree where people might not consider investing in the Switch ecosystem, there is no number to support that. True. The Switch is overwhelmingly this huge juggernaut force, and it's because Nvidia built it mobile first.
True.
The mobility experience is actually, in my opinion, better than the plug it into a TV experience. And so it's so good that the follow-up to the Switch doesn't switch.
True. It just stays pure mobile. That's what the Switch likes.
It just stays mobile. So, again, I know there's been this tribal team battle, team PlayStation versus team Xbox. Which one's going to be more powerful? Which one's going to be bigger? Which one's going to have better cooling? Which one can really do the 4Ks and can one do the 8Ks? And all of that's immaterial. It literally does not matter if developers can't make good games for the platform.
Sure.
And processing power today, even under a constrained processor load like a mobile focused solution, that's not the drawback. Is the developer utilizing the platform to create the experience that audience wants?
Yeah.
And the gaming experience on a Switch is unique to a Switch. It's why you can look at like a Pokemon Go still has some staying power on phones. It's because you can't do that on an Xbox.
Yeah, that is true.
So if you're not making the game for the platform or you're not making the game for the audience, then you failed. That's the failure. Is now we have an expectation of better visuals, of faster loading times, of better lighting and shadow detail, blah 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 blah. But that's not what makes the game fun.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I think in my personal opinion, just looking at it, where Nintendo, in my opinion, it feels super weird this year for Nintendo because, like, yes, you see Sony showing off all the new games, like, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn. You see the new God of War's coming. And then you see Microsoft literally just bought out IPs because, like, hey, you guys said we don't got games? Well, we own the games now because now they own Elder Scrolls. Now they own Doom.
Right.
And Doom, I honestly, in my opinion, I think Doom Eternal is game of the year. I think it's going to win it. No, I do not.
It's definitely some strong potential there.
Strong.
It's a weird year to talk about any type of media,
Sure.
but Doom came out just
Perfect.
like I was gonna make a bad pun, like Doom came out all guns blazing.
Basically.
Like, well, yeah,
It's like
that's
I
the
argue-
lamest joke I could come up with.
True. Like, I think with just thinking about Doom Eternal, it's just like a lot of people view it as just like the perfect game that just gives no Fs at this point. And Nintendo's just been weird because all the big games that they've announced, they just, like, Pokemon didn't do so well. Even though, yes, I know it's still Pokemon. The Pokemon IP will always sell like hotcakes regardless. Sword and Shield is not the most well-received Pokemon game to date. It's, for a lot of people,
No,
it's like, yes,
it definitely
still
has
sells good.
kind of-
It still sells
yeah.
good, not going to lie. It's still not the most well-received. Like, I don't see anybody talking about it. I don't see anybody playing it. Granted, when the new DLC comes out, the Crown Tundra, then everyone will talk about it again. And then, like, the new Hyrule Warriors game, a lot of people are excited for that, mainly because it explains the years before Breath of the Wild. And a lot of people love Breath of the Wild. So they're like, oh, if it's canon, then yeah, we'll buy it. We'll eat that stuff up like hotcakes. And then, but Nintendo, aside from that, doesn't have anything else. Like, they've been bullying Nintendo because these directs have been trash. Like, I'm just being honest. A lot of people are just like trash, even though I watch a lot of Shofu. Like,
The fan, I mean, whatever the sort of viewer sentiment might be, because you're talking the diehards that are watching the Nintendo Directs.
like Shofu and them.
Sure. The vocal minority can be frustrated with Nintendo's current launch strategy. They've always slow played games so that they deliver the game they want. I have to give Nintendo a lot of credit that they will kill projects if they're underperforming, or they just will delay until the game is right, as opposed to meeting some sort of arbitrary crunch deadline. And all this time that the diehard Switch commentators have been upset about these types of situations on the Switch is still crazy difficult to buy for being sold out in most retail spaces. Scalpers are still charging a premium for the Switch. People are still trying to get their hands on one. And that doesn't negate that Nintendo's current strategy is also catalog based, where if you want to play older titles and you have that fondness or that nostalgic feel for Nintendo IP, you have to get a Switch. I mean, there's like no other opportunity for you to do that. I mean, I almost grabbed a Switch just to play some of the Blaster Master sequels, you know, like it would have been two $25 games that would have motivated a $300 console purchase, you know, like that's what Nintendo cares about. There's always going to be a tentpole. They want to see an individual title sell well. They have shareholders, all of the economics. That totally makes sense. But they also have one of the most loyal long tail consumer experiences where
the Nintendo fan base is loyal till the day they die.
And on top of that, I have to believe that the tech and the hardware that's going into a Nintendo Switch is pretty frugal. You know, in the grand scheme of things, their manufacturing, the refinement, their ability to produce and execute these consoles is likely at a high profit margin for what it now takes to actually assemble these things. So again, Nintendo's strategy is beholden to Nintendo. They really don't view themselves as any kind of competitor against Microsoft looking to get more into streaming and software licensing, or Sony trying to lock up exclusives for a big, huge, monster powerful box, what lives under your TV. That's I always think it's one of the interesting aspects where Microsoft and Sony are competitors, but I don't think Nintendo views themselves as a similar solution. And I feel like a lot of Nintendo-heavy consumers probably feel the same way.
True. Even though, yes, I will be honest with the diehards, because like I mentioned, I watch a lot of Shofu, and I watched Shofu's podcast, the Japan Time podcast, and it was interesting watching them do it yesterday, where they talked about Microsoft buying Bethesda, and then they talked about how, because I know Shofu and his friends, they're diehard Sony fanboys. They have admitted it. They're like, the way one of my friends describes is they're Sony cocksuckers at this point, because they will jump on any wagon that they can get on for Sony just to dog Microsoft
for Sony dominance, right?
And Shofu and them just keep it honest. That's why I appreciate Shofu, because
I'll believe that if I see them rocking Xperia phones.
I that's one thing I was about to say too. I'm like, Shofu. Well, I know Shofu shoots on Sony. He loves PlayStation.
Sony cameras. That's easy. Sony cameras are great. Yeah, but I'm sitting here with an Xperia 1 Mark II, and it's one of the most gorgeous sleeper phones of the year. And someone's really diehard Sony, the phone that automatically supports DualShock controllers and has, I think, one of the better implementations for connecting with a PlayStation console. Like, if they're using anything else, then I can't believe that they're really Sony diehards. They're just filthy casuals that like to play with the popular things. They're not really living the Sony lifestyle.
True, and I will say that. Like, I know I talked with Viper when we talked about the whole launch of. We talked about the state of Apple, but then we talked a little bit about the Xbox and PlayStation. And a lot of people are like, Viper, you're such a PlayStation fanboy. And I'm like, well, no, Viper's been honest. He'll love Xbox to the day he dies. He just wants them to do better. And given what they did with ZeniMax, where they just bought out the IPs, and you even mentioned it too, how people get so attached to these games, like their loyal fan base, and it's like Doom and Elder Scrolls has such a loyal fan base. The same thing with like Final Fantasy and God of War. Like, these games have such a loyal fan base, even Spider-Man. And if the rumors are true that Microsoft could be buying WB, which that would include NetherRealm, which makes obviously Mortal Kombat, then Batman, which my friend has literally gone on record and said the only superhero that could possibly compete with Spider-Man is Batman. And I'm like,
Yep.
that is true. I love Superman, but
I mean, I don't know if you've been playing Avengers, but it's not it. It's not. It's
definitely
it's
not it.
not.
I don't care if you put
It's not
Spider-Man
it
there.
against Spider-Man.
Yeah, because it
Could be. I mean, it's fun. Not it.
Yeah, and I know with Spider-Man, like Miles Morales, yes, I know that Miles is not the most well-received Spider-Man in the comics, especially given like stories.
Oh,
that
I
they made.
love
Miles
the
from
Miles
Into the
Morales storyline. And I mean, Spider-Verse is great, but even back in what was it, the Spider-Man Ultimate storyline
Oh, yeah.
that he was introduced, it's such a beautiful and kind of tragic storyline. Like there's something like noble and emotional, and just how he rises to become a hero. I mean, that kind of story always gets me kind of worked up and gets the feels going. But back to the point, you know, when we're talking about Sony versus Microsoft, I think it's entirely too short-sighted to look at the very beginning of this console generation launch and be like, I like Microsoft, I just think they need to do better. Microsoft, I think, is looking at how they can end run around a strategy like Nintendo's. When I know a lot of people like say, oh, but not everyone can game stream today. And you're like, yeah, but we're looking at a 5 to 8 year plan. The console life cycle is like 5 to 8 years. So if you're telling me that with better compression, better encoding, technologies like DLSS, AI enhancements, and machine learning neural code, and hopefully a future presidential administration that will actually focus on broadband initiatives for more consumers, that in 8 years, you're still going to be expected to buy another monster powerful box that lives under your TV for the sole purpose of gaming, I have to believe you're not very good at tech.
True.
I have to imagine that you are not a futurist, and all you can see is the exact thing that you do today, and that's all you can imagine for the future, which I think is a pretty sad future.
Yeah.
You know, like that is a future with no vision. That is a future with no evolution. And you can look at something like, I refuse to do business or give them any of my money, but look at something like the Oculus refresh.
Yeah.
$300 for a fully portable wearable headset using an ARM processor, tying that back to the Nvidia topic, and enables a mobility in gameplay like nothing we've ever seen before. We've got smartphones that can easily tackle emulation of last generation PC titles. You know, like this is evolving rapidly, and the people that I think are going to be the most disruptive force in this are the ones that are already in the situations where they can afford to pick up a next gen console. But the economy sucks. Money's kind of tight for everybody, and you know, I'm not going to buy it on launch day, but, you know, I was really looking at an Xbox, but I already pay for decent broadband. Maybe I should just take xCloud for a spin.
True.
Maybe instead of buying a $500 box, what lives under my TV, all accessories, I'm saying like weighing all of what it would take to kind of plug it into my TV. Maybe a monthly fee and a subscription service that's more like Netflix makes more sense. And those are going to be the people who are tip of the spear. Those are going to be the people that are actually bleeding edge on this stuff, because we've already experienced this with Netflix. You know, you don't get the highest fidelity streaming 4K video on Netflix, but and you also do have to deal with the compromises of sometimes, you know, it gets a little flaky, or sometimes the connection isn't as stable, blah, 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 blah. But that hasn't slowed the adoption of streaming video solutions. I really feel like a bulk of consumers are going to start playing. You're like, yeah, you know, it's so annoying. Sometimes I get a dropout or a lag or something like that happens, but I didn't buy a $500 box. You know, I'm paying $15 a month.
True.
So I understand the proportionality of pros and cons. And those are going to be the people leading the discussion on what the next phase of gaming is going to look like.
True. And I think from my personal experience, like you even mentioned it too, how the idea is very enticing to include NVIDIA graphics on mobile phones. A lot of people are like, that's very interesting, because a lot of people are like, well, what would happen if we had NVIDIA graphics inside of phones? How would the processing look? How would games work? Like, how would maybe streaming could work a little bit better on mobile phones.
We're on top of a bunch of disruptive technologies, and honestly, I don't even think packing, if your focus is AAA gaming, like Xbox or PlayStation style gaming, I honestly don't think the GPU in your phone is going to matter that much if we're looking at a future where we can employ more server side.
Sure.
We're right on the cusp of next generation HEVC video compression, H.266.
Oh.
We're on H.265. The specs have already been detailed for H.266, which is going to enable, like 8K video in the same file sizes that we used to have 4K video for streaming solutions. So putting the image out over the internet is going to get smaller. At the same time, the processing load, because we're streaming and you don't need to generate exactly the same image fidelity as a locally rendered solution, we're already ahead of the curve with technologies like DLSS. So you can render a ton more image upscale using this AI compression, squish the video file more efficiently to send over the internet, and arrive at much higher visual fidelity, much more responsive interactions, far less lag than what we're currently doing today. And these are technologies that are here now. It's just employing them is probably another 1 to 3 years out, depending on the service, and getting a few more servers up to spec on, like the graphics crunching side of this. So halfway through this next generation console life cycle, we'll probably be talking about the emergence of 8K video streaming solutions for people in the best areas of data, broadband, and connectivity. 1080p 60 is gonna be cake. Getting high frame rate gaming for modest resolutions. You just imagine like where we were like PlayStation 3 and our last generation Xbox, like how difficult it was just to get the fastest frame rates at HD. And now we're gonna have streaming solutions that like won't even blink, sending that over the internet.
It's crazy.
So that to me again, we want to talk about disruption. We want to talk about how we shift services, how we move. I feel like the console or the giant, massive HEDT, gaming PC is going to become even more of a niche solution. And that's fine. There's always going to be someone who wants a 3090 and a Threadripper in a giant box with a huge power supply and a ton of RAM to locally create this experience. But I feel like gaming will be the proof of concept to also start leasing server timeout for other applications. Why build a monster workstation if I can, upload some video files over a decent video connection and a decent internet connection, and then edit and render on a massive server farm, and pay and lease that server time. That used to be a more profitable business in like the 80s, where companies would sort of lease out their corporate downtime on these massive servers. And I think we're coming back around to it. Gaming is going to show us that like you need to crunch big numbers, maybe just remote in to a Microsoft server or a Google data center or an Amazon work center or something like that. This is a turning point. Gaming is going to help lead the way, but I feel this is going to have huge implications for the rest of sort of the computing industry, and especially in a world where we're all kind of working from home and trying to figure out what the new normal is going to be. Now is the perfect time to start disrupting how we've done things in the past and looking for better ways we could do them in the future.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much sums up like the whole conversation. I'm just being honest, like for people listening, that if a lot of the conversation didn't make sense, the easiest way to sum it up is you can now see how this small, like not even this small purchase, like this purchase is such a very big factor in like changing how things will go forward, because some people are like, well, okay, that's not the big news. Like some people straight up told me, Josh, why talk about this news when you could talk about the big news, like jump the gun and talk about the Bethesda and ZeniMax, or the Microsoft buying ZeniMax, or talk about like the issues of the PS5
like
or the Xbox.
an acquisition like that, or pre-order sales, that is a topical story.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big story of the day.
Yeah.
Will be, if this Nvidia deal goes through and they acquire ARM, we will be talking about this acquisition and examining the impact of this acquisition for a generation of computer users.
Yeah.
Like it is a far-reaching tech story that we can't even begin untangling what the ramifications of this acquisition will actually mean for consumers.
True, because like I said, it's such a big thing that it's very hard to like say this is the exact pinpoint location of where this will affect and how will this, because it's like it could go any direction. Like it's kind of funny because that's how engineering is there's not just one way to do things. There's multiple ways to do things. Like some things are more efficient than others, but there is no exact right answer. Like there is no like for sure 100%, unless if it's like, no, this is more efficient, even though this does the same thing, but this is more efficient, so we're going to go with that. And in this scenario, it's so fascinating because it affects everything. Like a lot of people, like I said, they don't seem to realize this. Like, yes, I'd say on the surface level, it looks like a very boring conversation. Like, ugh, Microsoft bought them out for this much, or Nvidia bought ARM for this much. Like, does it really, like, okay, who cares? And then you think about it in the grand scheme of things, you're like, hold on. This could affect computing devices. Everything. Or computing devices, or anything that's considered a computer, which anything that pretty much has a brain in it is considered a computer. So it affects a lot of things for decades to come, because yes, changes with Nvidia and ARM will not happen overnight. That's just honest. Like it will not happen like overnight, like, okay, boom. But after years and years and years of developing research, because it is a bit interesting thinking about it too, because Nvidia has been putting so much into AI, and so has ARM. And somebody even mentioned it, like, who's going to be in charge of that? So is one just going to swallow the other up and then go from there, or are they just going to? And it's a very weird thing, because we just don't know what's going to happen, because the deal hasn't gone through, because it still has to go through legislation. It still has to be, it still has to
examined.
be
Regulators have to kind of take their look at it. And then they also might say that Nvidia needs to divest themselves of some of their other core businesses.
Sure.
I very much believe we could see, a ruling from a regulatory body saying, like, yeah, you can get ARM and you can keep your GPU business, but you need to get out of this kind of AI and this self-driving, and those need to be sold off or split off into separate entities. So it's a story that doesn't have the panache. It doesn't have the sexiness of, oh man, Microsoft just got a bunch of exclusives and ZeniMax. Wow. But that headline is gone in a day. And what we'll be looking at is, now we're starting a journey that we need to keep an eye on. And honestly, the tech landscape right now, especially tech fans, are not really good at following the ball. Like, they're really good at wigging out over a headline of the day. And then, like, you come back in 6 months and you're like, well, but did that happen? Or what was the fallout? Or what were the ramifications of that? And you kind of just get blank stares, like, oh.
Yeah, they're not good at following up, which I think it's a very dangerous thing to do that, because if you're not,
like, you just kind of allow a company to create a new normal, and you're like, yeah, but we had some say in that. We could have spoken up, or we could have voiced some concerns, or we could have embraced it, and maybe this is going to be a positive, and we can kind of push for some change that helps improve the market, or creates new opportunities. Like, we're real bad. We're real bad at doing the long term on that.
I think that's a lot of things people don't seem to realize, is like going back to the whole discussion of the casuals versus the the hardcore tech fans, or it's like the casuals seem to be paying more attention to the long-term game more than anything. And I think that's just something we have to be mindful of, is that they just seem to be more focused on the long-term game than techies.
I feel like, we use words like casual or average consumer, and we kind of use it in a very like we're superior because we get this stuff. But no, the consumer market decides the next areas of where manufacturers and companies produce products. And overwhelmingly, consumers are voting with their wallets, and they're not in line with the tech elite. We are a niche, vocal minority. And I would say we're more emotionally driven to supporting the companies and brands and products that we enjoy than this supposed doesn't know as much about tech average consumer. No, those people are voting with their wallets, and they're voting to make the best possible tech lifestyle purchasing decisions that they can. And their numbers overwhelmingly eclipse what our value might be in being the cranky, loud, armchair quarterbacking. All they need to do is make it better and make it cheaper. Oh, I just wish they made it worth it for the monies. If they made it worth it enough, then I would buy it. But they didn't make it worth it enough. That's an irrelevant conversation to this market.
It is.
The consumers voted with their wallets and actually contributed to the discussion. Someone sitting on the sideline, pontificating on business is worth zero to a company making a console or a phone or a computer.
True. And I think wrapping this all up in the best way that I possibly can, where this is a discussion that doesn't just end here. This is a discussion that keeps going on in the first.
Yeah, it's barely started.
It's barely just started. Like, that's why people always say, like, you have to be mindful, and especially as true techies, or even just people that are truly paying attention to what's going on. This is where we have to be more responsible and take more, I'd say, more of a leadership role and keep addressing these conversations as it keeps developing, because that's what's going to happen. Is this will keep developing over the years to come. Granted, yes, the Xbox news and everything, I'll talk about that later, but this is something that I wouldn't be surprised in maybe like a year or two from now, I do another episode talking about it, and we see, okay, what has changed since the last time we talked about it? Because this isn't something that just goes away today. Like, we don't, this isn't a conversation that's just like today and we're done.
And the politics on this are going to be really interesting. I know, again, as techies is like, well, I'm into tech and I'm above politics. Literally everything we care about is politics. Like, if you don't have an eye on the future of broadband deployment, of net neutrality, right to repair legislation, if you're not looking at regulators' interests and mergers and acquisitions, then you're allowing people who are probably some of the least tech savvy in our operating government to decide the rules for you in how the future of your hobby is going to be served to you. So it behooves us to keep, I mean, it's not like, everyone just has to go out and become a policy wonk overnight, but you need to pay some attention, like whenever this deal is actually put before regulators and they have their say on how Nvidia might be able to carve up this business strategy, it's going to have huge business implications. We're going to see stock market swings. We're going to see layoffs. We're going to see, watching teams get, stapled together to other internal departments at Nvidia. This is really heady stuff. And if you're not aware of what's happening at this point, it's going to come as a surprise when business strategies change in 2 years to reflect, how Nvidia owns a part of this market now.
Yeah, and I think
you don't want to be caught by surprise. You want to be able to at least kind of keep an eye on a forecast where your own products are protected, your own financials are protected, your own lifestyle, what you care about in technology, you can kind of defend or join the conversation on.
True. And that's why I tell people all the time, like, yes, I think it's always important to remind yourselves, like, hey, not everyone's going to have the same political opinion as you, and that's okay. Like, it's
okay that people are wrong. I mean, you play on a controller to play Halo. I mean, it's okay.
True. Like, I'm just being honest. I'm just telling people the truth. Like,
I'm sorry. I couldn't help one last day.
I know.
It's all in love.
I'll give you that one.
It's all in love.
Like, I tell people all the time, like, yes, it's okay that somebody has a different political opinion than you. It's okay. But don't be ignorant to what's going on in front of you. Like, pay attention to what's actually happening. Like, when you see these things like net neutrality and things like that, like all these, like, deployment of broadband, like purchases like this, where it's like, you have to be mindful, like, okay, are the people in charge of us making the right call in this matter? And if not, how can we educate them and help share some better insight if they are not well informed? What resources can we give them that they can take a look at and be like, okay, let's think about it from this angle, and then give them more incentive to actually make a true healthy decision rather
And
than
just to tag that one thing that you said, these are not the people in charge of us.
True.
We are in charge of them.
True.
And I feel like being an active participant in this conversation has become one of the critical deficiencies of our political process. Now, we're all tired. The world is crazy, and it is exhausting just going day to day these days. But that's also the perfect smokescreen. It's the perfect cover for people who do not share in the tech community, who do not share our interests or what we value, to do things in our name because we're too tired to keep up with them.
True.
You know, we're too tired to pay attention. And it's that kind of exhaustion and apathy which is going to lead us down a road we probably don't want to go. So again, it's always worth just kind of pointing that out to say, you know, to whatever degree or whatever political affiliation, if you're not joining the conversation, you're irrelevant, and everything will be done to you and you won't contribute to it.
True. And it's not being harsh, it's just being honest. That's just the reality of it. It's if you are not...
Oh, I'm being a little harsh, you know.
Right. Like, I know you will. Like, I know I'm more of a, you know, I like to at least give it a little bit more of a sugar coat, but I know, like, some people...
I've got a spoonful of medicine to help the sugar go down. So,
like, I know in my case, like, yes, there's days when I want to be just super blunt with people, but granted, you know, just being honest, given my job, I cannot be blunt honest all the time because Disney customer service. But I'm like, there's some days in my head where I'm like, you guys can take that as customer service and shove it.
Come on.
I'm like, come on, my guy. Like, you can take it and shove it. But aside from that, I thank you, Juan, for coming back. It really, like,
yeah, for sure.
In my opinion, it definitely helped me to understand this a lot better. And at the same time, it also helped flesh out the discussion even more because, like I said, this isn't just something that we can just say, okay, this is the end of the line for this conversation, move on. It's more of a bookmark on it. And then when more stuff develops, then we come back to it. And then that's really just how this conversation, specifically for this topic, is going to go, because it doesn't just end here. It revolves everyone being actively involved and paying attention to what's happening, because, like I said, this affects everything. This isn't just something that's like, okay, we're done, like, it's over. No, this is something that affects everybody on many levels. Like, it affects so many things that people need to realize, okay, maybe we should start paying attention. If you haven't been paying attention before, that's okay. You might be a little bit slow for that, but
the best time to start is right now.
Right now. Like that's why people always say you're never going to truly grow if you're always staying in your chair. The only way you can truly grow and come to understand something and learn to, I'd say, come out of your shell a little bit, is if you get out of your chair and get out of your comfort zone. This is an instance where now you're going to have to put in some work to understand what's going on. And it's okay. We're not throwing you into the deep end of the pool and seeing if you can swim right away. But we're going to encourage you to, hey, give it a try. Like, consider being involved. Sure. Consider, you know, like in my case, like I always use the metaphor how, for me, coming to understand a lot of things that I did growing up, like, yeah, my mentors throw me into the deep end of the pool and they're like, well, you ended up swimming and it works. So we don't recommend it for everybody. It just worked for you. So, you know, that's why I tell people all the time. It's like, we're not throwing you deep in the pool, but we're encouraging you to consider giving it a try, to actually get involved and be active and be part of the conversation. But again, thank you, Juan, for coming back. I really appreciate you, brother, for coming back. And for everybody listening,
yeah, definitely,
I thank you guys for listening to this episode. It's definitely the longest one we've had in a while, but it necessitated this kind of discussion because of how important it is in the grand scheme of things. But, you know, obviously, you guys, whoever's listening to this on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, granted, there will be no video for this episode because, you know, I'm just being honest, it's way too long. I don't want to have me on video for that long. But I thank you guys for coming back and listening. Obviously, the Patreon backers, you guys will get this episode early. So thank you guys for your continued support. And I don't know, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners, Juan?
Nah, I just I want you to do awesome with your technology, and I want you to be awesome with your technology.
True. But again, I love you guys to death. Everybody have a wonderful week. We will be talking about the Xbox story this week because, like I said, that's a really topic of the day, but I do have some thoughts on that, especially given recent things that have happened. But I love you guys today. Please have yourselves a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys Friday. Bye, guys. Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.